All right. I think a few folks are waiting to be let in from the waiting room. Um, but welcome, folks. We're going to have a little talk about gender, also kind of a trans 101, but rather than 101, I think of it more as a conversation. We're just going to talk a little bit about that. Before I get started, these are being, of course, shown in all of your workshops. So if you've been attending another session, they should have gone over these as well. These are just the community agreements and Zoom etiquette for the OCID conference. So again, closed groups are designated for folks who identify with that particular identity and are saved for those folks. I'm not going to read this again verbatim, but I'm just going to go over it again. They should again be shown in all of your sessions. So two, calling people in, mistakes happen. So of course, this is a learning opportunity. And so if mistakes may happen, again, just be respectful and make corrections, apologize, and we can continue to move on. Number three, move up, move up. So again, folks are coming from all different backgrounds, generations, have a variety of experiences. And so this is, again, to create a respectful space to allow folks to move in and listen, and then also to give space to folks to step up and participate in maybe a different way that they might not normally. Photographs and videos. Again, this session is being recorded for archival purposes, but we're asking that you do not record the session or take photos of the session itself unless you have already, I guess, been given permission to do so. And then, of course, respect confidentiality. Some folks are here and we just want to respect everybody who's coming to this space, what they're sharing, the things that they might contribute to the conversation, and not share that outside of these spaces unless you've been given permission to do so. Just some Zoom etiquette. If you could rename yourself to include your pronouns, I've done that, and you can use mine as an example. If you could mute yourself upon entering into the space. I would love for folks to be able to have video on at some point when we're doing a Q&A, just so I can see folks' faces if that's comfortable for them. And then if you're interacting via the feed loop chat, please use that as another way that you can have conversation and sort of engage while at the workshop and throughout the conference. And then you obviously may move between workshops. Just again, be sure that you're muting your mic to avoid disturbance if you're entering a different session. And then there's some tech support information if you need it. But my name is Aiden. My pronouns are he, him, and his. We are going to have a little conversation about gender and go over just a little bit. And we're talking some brief terminology. We've covered already the Zoom etiquette and community agreements. So there's a little checkbox. We're already started. And then we're going to do a little bit of practice, little matching game with that terminology, some things that you can do and resources, and then a Q&A or discussion at the end. So we're going to have a little bit of time here together. I do want to acknowledge, in addition to the community agreements, that this may be the first time folks are having this conversation. I completely understand that this is, especially around terminology and maybe trans and gender related things, that this could be overwhelming or intimidating, or it's just a lot of information. And so I appreciate you being here and maybe stepping out of that comfort zone. But I think this is going to be a really awesome experience for all of us to have this conversation. So a little bit about me. So I'm an activist. I do work full-time for a public high school in Southern California. But when I'm not doing that, I do a lot of work around LGBTQ, equality issues, education, awareness, anything really that I feel, calls to me. And I do that really through the act of storytelling. So sharing my own personal experience, things that have happened to me throughout my life. So I definitely consider myself a storyteller, and I am a huge Disney fan. And that's like the entire Disney, everything. So Star Wars, Marvel, old school Disney stuff, all of it. I love it all. And so just kind of a little basics about me before we kind of get started into some of this terminology and such. So let's see here. So words, lots of words. And it is a lot. I even for myself, who, you know, I engage in a lot of this work quite often, it's sometimes hard to keep up. So I completely understand that. And I will provide, I think there's a way for me to upload my slides and stuff. I will provide that for folks if they'd like to reference this after the workshop. But again, terminology does change over time. You know, I think it's our responsibility as citizens, as folks, as people, to make sure that we are being mindful of those changes and not just, you know, looking at this once and leaving it alone. You know, even over the last probably five or 6 years or so, things have changed. And so it's just important to kind of check in every so often and make sure that we're using the most respectful terminology. Also, just some of these terms and words may be used differently or mean something different to other folks. What I did for this was use something that really is comfortable for me. I also integrated the definitions from PFLAG National's glossary. And so just understand that for folks in your life, they might define some of these terms differently. And so it's important to have a conversation and listen to those folks and use what is most respectful for them. So I know a lot of things to consider, but I promise we'll be okay. We're gonna get through this. I also encourage you to use the chat. I would love to engage with you all in that way. So if you have questions, there's gonna be room for that too. All right, so this is just a little, we're not jumping ahead, I promise. This is a little visual I like to use. We are gonna cover basically what these things mean, but understanding that all of these things are, you know, parts of us, and it's not all or nothing, or one thing, you know, somehow overrides all of it. These are all things that all of us have, regardless of how we identify. And I just want you to see it so that you're aware of it as we go through these terms, and then we'll look at it again at the end. But just so you have an idea, kind of that these are all parts of who we are separately. Together, they make up who we are, but they are separate things. So again, we'll circle back to it, but just wanted you to have sort of a little preview. All right, let's dive in now. All right, so let's go through these. I have I have focused on only 12 terms here. Not because I think they're the most important, but because, again, to build a foundation and to start this understanding of gender and just the diversity within that, I think these are important to have. But I do encourage you to continue looking up, you know, maybe some of the other terminology on PFLAG's glossary or on another LGBTQ plus org's glossary to see just how sort of deep this goes. But so let's go assigned sex or assigned sex at birth. But this is obviously the sex that we are assigned at birth based purely on the visual either sex organs, physical characteristics that somebody has, right? This is not something that we have a say in. This is something that the doctor or medical professional determined for us. And again, it was purely based on the appearance of how we seem when we're born. Gender identity. So this is a person's deeply held core sense of self in relation to gender. So this does not always correspond to one's biological sex. I will use myself as an example because I think that sometimes that's a little abstract. So I was assigned female at birth. I obviously had no say in that. As I got older, I learned more about myself. I learned about gender identity. That, for me, identify as a male differs from my sex assigned at birth, right? So my gender identity is one thing, my sex assigned at birth is something different. All right, so cisgender. So this is somebody, unlike myself, this is somebody who whose gender identity does align with the sex that they were assigned at birth. For the majority, probably, of the population in the world, that this is probably the case. And so cis comes from the word same, right? So cisgender. And then of course, transgender. I tried to group these, but I realized like it doesn't, they all kind of work together, but I did try to kind of pair these up a little bit. So a person's gender identity, this is a person, describes a person whose gender identity does not necessarily match their assigned sex at birth. Trans folks may or may not decide to utilize hormones or access anything surgical. And another way you might hear this is shortened to just saying trans. So the trans community or trans folks or trans people. As a note, to use the word transgender correctly, it is used as an adjective. It's not a noun, it's not a verb. And so things like transgender people or transgender community, trans community is appropriate, but transgenders or transgendered would most often be viewed as disrespectful. And best way I can describe that is like for myself, I do identify as a trans person, but I'm not transgendered. It's not something that happened to me. It's not a past event in my life. It is who I am. It is to describe me and my identity. And so just something to take note of in using the word trans or transgender appropriately. And again, if you have questions or things, please throw them into the chat. For now, I'll keep moving on. So non-binary. So this refers to folks who do not subscribe to the gender binary, meaning that, there's only man or only woman, only male, only female. They might exist beyond that or in between that. And so it's knowing that this is not just this simple binary, but much larger spectrum. So intersex folks, this is used to refer to folks whose biologically are based purely on, again, medical definitions between male and female. So usually at birth or at a younger age, but it can happen later. Biological sex is distinct. An intersex person's biological sex is distinct from their gender identity and sexual orientation. So a person who is intersex may have any gender identity that aligns for them, and can also have a different sexual orientation or romantic orientation. Them being an intersex person does not define those other things. Right, moving through here. So I did reference this earlier, but gender binary. So it's a disproven concept, right? That there's only two genders, male and female, which is like kind of what, at least for me, I grew up learning, and that everybody must fall within those two categories, right? And so that is not so much the case. Really what it is that there's a gender spectrum, which is the idea, right? The concept that gender extends beyond just these simple two binaries, and that it really is a continuum, and that folks can fall really anywhere on that continuum. Some folks may move along it throughout their lives, throughout different points in their life, and some may not even really identify with any part of that spectrum. They just exist beyond all of it. And so really it's just to say that this is a lot more complicated and complex, right, than just simply saying that there is men and there's women, or there's male and there's female, that we have a much more diverse range of identities than just that. All right, so gender expression. So this is how a person communicates gender to other people. And this can be things like appearance, the clothes that they wear, mannerisms, hairstyles. This is an outward thing, and it is a communication that more could be conscious, right? Like I made a decision to wear this hat today, to have my hair cut a certain way, or it might be subconscious in that they're really, internally reflecting externally what they are feeling internally, and they may not even realize it, right? But this is really what we see. So this is the clothes, again, the mannerisms, maybe the posturing, how we speak, hairstyles. external appearance. And then transition. So this is just referring to the process, whether that be social, legal, or medical, that a person can go through in the process of affirming their gender identity, right? So for me, because again, I can really only speak to myself. I have a lot of friends, but it's not my story to tell. What I chose to do to transition and for me to feel most in alignment with who I am and to affirm who I am, I changed my name, right? I am on hormones currently. I had my documentation changed, right? Those are things for me. Again, this may vary for folks. And there's not one way to do this. I like to think of it as like how we drink coffee. Not everybody drinks their coffee the same way. Some people, right, drink their coffee black. I'm a big fan of, like a little bit of cream and sugar in my coffee, right? So that's the same thing with transitioning. Folks are going to do this in a way that fits for them. And there's not a one rule or one way folks are allowed to, right? Because they're not allowed, but that they may choose to go through this process, right? All right, and these are our last two, and there's many more again, but these are just sort of I felt like a good starting foundation place. So misgender. This is referring, when you refer to somebody using a word or their pronouns that do not reflect their gender. So in my case, if somebody were to use she and her as pronouns in reference to me, that is not right how I identify. That is not my my gender identity, and obviously my pronouns are listed here in my name. So they would be misgendering me, right? Or to refer to me as a woman would be misgendering me. And then sexual orientation. And I realized that this doesn't, this is like we're talking about trans and gender based things, but some folks tend to confuse trans things with sexual orientation. So I've had folks ask me in the past about, if I transition, then does that mean that I'm gay? And they're separate again. We're about to circle back to that gender unicorn I showed earlier, but basically, right, sexual orientation is a person's physical, romantic, emotional attraction to another person, right? So gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same thing, right? They are parts of us. We all have these parts of us, but they are not the same, and one does not dictate the other. So just something to remember there. So we're going to circle back to this because I think it helps to break it down. But again, right, we're talking about gender identity is a part of us. It's internal. You can see the little rainbow sort of thought bubble coming out of the unicorn's head, right? It's what we, when we close our eyes, how we envision and see ourselves, who we are, and our identities. Expression, you can see the green dots on the outside. It's how we express that gender to the world through the clothes we wear, our haircuts, how we do our makeup, the things that folks can see. Sex assigned at birth, again, right? That's not something we had any control over. It was assigned to us based purely on physical appearance upon our birth. And then physical or emotional attraction to, right, is our sexual orientation. So that is who we love, right? The people that we love and want to be with, whether that's in relationships or just be with. So those are 12, again, foundational, I think, but there are many more. I do encourage folks to explore that more, to look up. I've been using PFLAG National's glossary, which was just updated at the beginning of this year. There are a lot of good organizations that have very, very thorough glossaries, and I do encourage folks to check those out. So we're going to do a little bit of interacting here, folks. So if you have a keyboard, I do encourage it. I come from an education background, and so, we can lock this in a little bit, but I'm not calling on folks. This is just a general thing. You're going to answer in the chat. And so it's 100%, you don't have to. I'm highly encouraging it. At least if you're at your home and you're alone, I encourage you to still answer in your head. But I would like to see folks in the chat so that I know, folks are there. So we're gonna practice a little bit. It's just a little bit of matching. I did provide a legend with all the words, but it is broken down. So we're just gonna go through these one at a time. I'm gonna give folks a couple seconds here to answer. Let me just pull up the chat window because I don't have it. There we go. All right, folks. So we'll just start at the top and work our way down. So a term describing a person's gender identity that does not necessarily match their assigned sex at birth. Right, so throw in your answer in the chat. I left all the terms on the right side there. And you have a chance to answer. Just in the chat, anybody. I know it's hard to be the first one. So, and I know there are folks in here who probably already know the answers, which you're welcome then to also still answer. All right, so we're talking about this first one here, term describing a person's gender identity that does not necessarily match their assigned sex at birth. I don't want to answer these for folks. That seems silly. There we okay, we have an answer in there. Close. So we're looking for we are looking for, and honestly, I appreciate you throwing an answer in there because that has to be that's hard. The first one. So where are we here? So yeah, a term describing a person's gender identity that does not necessarily match their assigned sex at birth. So we're looking at the answer for this is transgender, right? So trans person is a person, right, whose gender identity does not match their assigned sex at birth, right? So we're gonna move on to the second one. I do encourage folks, type in the chat. I promise this is a learning experience, right? We're here to learn together, and so, you know, this is your chance to do it in a very safe, you know, and supportive place. So we're gonna try the second one here. So this is to refer to someone using a word, especially a pronoun or form of address, which does not correctly reflect their gender or gender identity, right? So to refer to someone using a word or pronouns or any form of address. There we go. We got some answers in there. Correct. You are all correct, right? Yeah. So we do not, this is something we don't want to be doing, right? We do want to use the pronouns and the name that folks are asking us to use. Awesome. Cool. I'm seeing them in the chat. Right on. Let's go to this third one here. So this refers to a person who does not subscribe to the gender binary, right? So this is a person that does not, a person, right, refers to a person who does not subscribe to the gender binary. Awesome. Right on. Here we go. Yeah, I know it's definitely intimidating, but I promise this is a supportive space. We're going to learn, we're going to grow together. So I appreciate y'all throwing stuff into the chat. Awesome, looks good. Non-binary, y'all are on it. All right, fourth one here. So this is a person's deeply held core sense of self in relation to gender, right? So how they feel when they close their eyes, right? What is it that they, yes, awesome. Right, so we're talking about someone's gender identity, right? So how their internal sense of being itself, how they identify. Cool, right on. Fifth one, I should have numbered these instead of use bullets. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fifth one, so this is the disproven concept that there are only two genders and that everyone has to be one of those or the other, I guess. Right on. Yep, there we go, right? A gender binary. So, and it is a disproven concept, right? That there are only two genders. So, right, that folks have to folks have to fall into one of those. Not true, not true. Gender binary. All right, and last one on this page, and we have a second slide. So this is a term that is used to refer to the process, whether that is social, legal, and or medical, that one goes through to affirm their gender identity. So the term used to refer to the process of socially, legally, and or medically going through to affirm one's gender identity. Yes, awesome, right? That process of transitioning or to transition. And again, right, that's something that is going to mean something different to everybody. I use the coffee analogy. I think I've used in the past also a, choose your own adventure, right? Like, those books. I don't even know if they still make those books where you get to choose, right, how the story ends. Similar to that. So awesome. Yeah, I've seen those in the chat. Perfect. All right, we have 6 more to go, folks. And if you can kind of remember, you have 6 other, I left them all on there because I felt like that was too easy to just put 6 and 6 on each page. So the glossary of terms is all 12, but we did already go through 6, so keep that in mind. But the concept that gender exists beyond simply man and woman and that binary model, but instead exists on a continuum, right? So perfect, yes, right? So we are not limited to this binary that we grew up hearing about, and that unfortunately is still being told to folks, that gender exists far beyond those things, and folks exist all up and along that and beyond it. So not limiting folks, right, to that. All right, the second one on this slide. So this is to describe a person's enduring physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to another person, right? So who it is that they are attracted to. Yes, perfect. Sexual orientation. Awesome, right? And again, someone's sexual orientation and their gender identity, they have no bearing on each other. They are not, one does not somehow impact the other, right? So by someone transitioning doesn't suddenly change who they are attracted to, or vice versa, right? These are independent parts we all have these parts to our being, and so something to remember there. We go this third one here. So this is the sex assigned to an infant at birth based on visible, either sex organs or physical characteristics, right? I realized that one I kind of cheated when I wrote that, since I put the word in there. It's like playing taboo. This would have been not correct, but there you go. I gave that one away a little bit, but yes, you're all correct there. Assigned sex, right? Someone's assigned sex based on physical appearance upon birth. The fourth one here. So this is a term used to refer to an individual whose gender identity aligns with the one associated, aligns with the one that they were given, basically assigned at birth, right? Yes. Y'all can read faster than I can read out loud. But yes, we're talking about someone who identifies as cisgender, right? So the sex they were assigned at birth is exactly how they identify their own gender identity now. And so they are, yes, cisgender. Okay, awesome. Let me scroll back here a little bit. Okay. The last 2 here. So this 5th one. So this is a current term used to refer to folks who are biologically between the medically expected definitions of male and female. Nice, awesome. Here we go. Getting a little warmed up now. Folks are feeling a little more comfortable. Perfect. Yes, so we're talking about someone who is, sorry, where am I in here? Someone who is intersex, right? And the last one here, should be the easiest since process of elimination should be the only one left. But the way a person communicates about gender to others through external means such as clothing, appearance, and mannerisms, right? Very close. I think I did see gender identity show up in there. And so gender identity, again, we're talking about someone's inner, what they feel inside in their soul, deep in there, right? Expression is how we outwardly show that, right? So I do see that also popping up in there, but I just want to again give that final sort of distinction, right? We're talking about expression, how we express it outwardly to the world, how others see it when they look at us. What is it they're seeing? The clothes, right? Our hairstyles, makeup, the things that we sort of do to then, right, represent our gender identity. Cool. All right. Again, I encourage folks to use the chat if you're feeling like you have questions or there's things, but there is room for questions officially at Q&A. But I do encourage folks to use the chat for that. So awesome. Perfect. Let's see here. All right. So terminology is definitely part of it, right? Because I think we have to understand the words to use, right? And the proper sort of respectful way to use them in order to support folks on a very foundational level, right? Like using pronouns, understanding that when someone is, maybe telling you that they're going to transition, what does that mean, right? And again, that might mean something different, but just the fact that they're saying that, folks, to support them best, right? We have to kind of understand on a very, very foundational level what exactly that means. But some other ways that in my own life, I have found to feel supported, right, is just having folks listen to me. Because again, what I'm telling you and the things that worked for me may not apply to folks in your life or the folks that you meet in the future. So listening to what it is that they're saying and how they would like to most feel respected and to be addressed, right? How they feel supported is going to be different. To not assume a person's gender identity or pronouns. Sometimes we want to read, even my own brain wants to put folks in boxes. It's just the way sort of our brains kind of work, and we grew up learning. And I have to kind of constantly remind myself to not do that too. But sometimes I want to, just based purely on what someone's wearing, the way that they express their gender. Makes me want to put them into some kind of a box, and that's not the right way to do it, right? I don't want to assume that their gender identity is a certain way based on the clothes that they're wearing, or even based on how I met them originally, right? If it's someone I haven't seen in a while. So not assuming those things, referring to folks by the name, gender and pronouns that they do share with you. So if folks do share some of this information with you, you want to make sure to respect that and to use those names and pronouns with that person. And it is challenging. I 100% understand that. If it's somebody you've known for a long time, and then they're asking you to use different names and pronouns, it will be a process, right? But you want to try your best to continue to do that because it is a sign of respect to that person. Respecting a person's privacy. So if they do share things with you about being trans or non-binary, or really just anybody part of the LGBTQ community, you would not want to share that information beyond that conversation unless you've been given permission to do so. You might be the only person that they've told. And so this is for that person to share when they're ready, if and when they want to. So you want to respect that person's privacy. If you work somewhere, if you're, even in your own house maybe, but putting up things that you can show that you're an ally, pins, buttons, I don't know. I have a thing in my window at home that just it's kind of that long list. I'm sure folks have seen it, but it says, in this house we believe, right? And it has a bunch of things listed. Showing visual signs that you are an ally. And then you want to be mindful of microaggressions or backhanded compliments. And I do want to give you a couple examples of what that means, because I think people have said things in the past to me that they're well-intentioned, but actually quite harmful and hurtful. So something like asking me, if I've had surgery yet. Sort of the assumption would be that by asking me, they somehow are supportive because they're like, they want to know. It's really not any of their business. I've had folks in the past say something like, if I hadn't shared that I was a trans person or that I had transitioned, they wouldn't have known that I wasn't a real man. And the word real, right, is the part that's problematic, because it assumes that trans folks are not real men or real women or real people, that somehow that we're sort of not, because we transitioned, right? And so being aware of things like these sort of compliments, that are backhanded compliments and or microaggressions, are ways that you're going to show support to other folks in your lives, in your community, the places you work. That's obviously 6 things. I would love for folks to throw into the chat other ways that you feel like you could support trans folks, gender expansive folks, gender diverse folks in your life or in your community, your families, the people, places you work. Maybe you have experience in or a way you've already shown support to folks in your life. What are some ways, I guess? So feel free to throw them up in the chat. Again, there's no, I'm not here to judge your answers. We're here to learn again, right? So I'm encouraging folks to use the chat, engage a little bit. I think this would be obviously a lot different if we were in person together, but the chat is our friend. And this is the best way for us to interact right now. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so correcting folks, right? This is a very specific example, right? Christy threw up here in the chat about correcting somebody. That could be anybody in your life, right? Whether it is your child, coworker, friend, right? It is super helpful having folks who are willing to do that for you, because it's heavy to do that on your own, right? If I was always having to do that by myself, it would be difficult. Yes, and that ties into exactly what Caitlin says here. What's up, Caitlin? Standing up for folks, right, when they're being disrespected or mistreated. Because a lot of times that falls on that person, and sometimes it's not safe for me to do that by myself. Like having somebody else there to be able to help support me in that, says I have folks, right, who are behind me. I'm not just by myself. So yes, definitely wanting to do that. I missed one, I think, in here. There we go. So right, acknowledging that there's somebody you love, right, and you're going to continue to love, right. And I do say, if you're saying that, I hope folks really carry and follow through with that. I've worked with several youth who end up somewhere with a kind of a but, right? Like, we love you, but there's like a kind of a thing there. So really, following through on that, right? Like, you're saying it, please mean it. All right, cool. Any others? Ways you feel like you could support folks in the community? Whether they're your family, maybe folks you go to church with, people you work with. And again, I know it sounds a little hard because we're talking about supporting folks, right? And I also told you not to out somebody, right? You don't want to share someone's personal information. But you don't have to call a person out, right, to show support. Right. Perfect. Yes. Using the right pronouns. Yes. And it is a process. I understand that, especially if it's folks who you've known for many years, maybe someone you grew up with. But I wouldn't want, I guess I would encourage folks to not let that be the reason it hinders you in that, right? Like, really making the effort to put forward. I saw actually a really good example, and I meant to include it in here and I forgot, about how, I think it was just a thing on my social media, but basically, like, when somebody was saying their sister got married, it was really easy for folks. Oh, now you're Mrs. So-and-so, right? But suddenly, and that was no problem. But suddenly when they're like, this is my name, it's like, oh, it's so difficult. It's too difficult. I've known you by this name your whole life. And it's like, we don't do that for everything. For some things we've socially been, it's like, fine, you got married, now that's your name. Let's see here. Chris says, right, asking person directly what's the best ways to support them, right? Because again, that's going to be different. What works for me is going to be different from the next person in the ways that I personally feel supported. So having conversations with folks in your life that you're close to, that you feel comfortable doing so, right, hear it directly from them. So these are good. Feel free to throw any more up there. I am going to move through. I figured my mother would probably throw something in here. But educate yourself with posters. So yes, the Family Acceptance Project has some really awesome sort of infographic posters you can download. There's a lot of great information there. I encourage you to look that up. If anything from this, this whole conversation we're having, write that down, Google search that. Dr. Caitlin Ryan, I believe, is in this session right now. And, you know, has some really great work on, you know, ways to support things, and it's just statistics and a lot of great research that goes into this. So definitely Google that. Exposure to diverse people and experiences, right? So that people are more accepting of each other. I think, yeah, I think when we learn, right, about different human experiences, it definitely, it changes, right, the dialogue. And so we have to have these conversations, right, in order for things to change. And so, awesome. I'm gonna move forward here. So I do want to have time for some specific questions if folks do have them. And again, I promise, you know, I will say this: I've never not answered someone's question. I just may not answer in the way that you wanted me to, but I will always make an attempt to answer someone's question. I'm also more than happy to share if you're asking. You know, I can share things about my personal experience. But really, this is about setting this foundation, right, for folks to move forward and you to use as a launch pad into learning more. But yes, Dr. Caitlin Ryan has thrown the link into our chat. I encourage folks to bookmark that and take a look later. It's got a lot of solid stuff that I've used in many trainings, used it in the schools that I work in. We share it at our PFLAG chapter. So I really encourage you to check it out. If anything else, if you've taken nothing away from this and my little matching game, please take that away from it. So let's talk about some resources. And I don't even have it on here, but you have one to start, the Family Acceptance Project. Here's some other organizations that I have used in the past. So again, I referenced PFLAG already. PFLAG is a national nonprofit organization. They provide support and education and advocacy for LGBTQ folks and their families and allies. There are chapters all throughout the country. And so if you're looking for support, they have some downloadable resources too that you can check out. One is even specific to trans, supporting trans folks. And CAPIA, so they're basically it's like I think it says on their site like a federation of organizations, but it's LGBTQ, Asian American, Southeast Asian, Pacific Islander organizations. I guess I'll use federation because I think that's what's on their website. A federation of LGBTQ, Asian American, Southeast Asian, and Pacific Islander organizations. We have the National LGBTQ Task Force. So they're a social justice advocacy organization. They do a lot of amazing work. They also have a conference they do every year called Creating Change. If you are interested in getting more involved, kind of, you know, putting the boots to the ground, they have some really great information at that conference. I believe it's in New Orleans in January for 2022. We have Gender Spectrum. They create gender sensitive and inclusive. Their goal is to create gender sensitive and inclusive environments for all children and teens. As a person who works in education, I have used some of their resources in helping students who have come out and disclosed that they are looking to transition within our school setting. So right, more socially, but just a way to have that conversation, facilitate that space. But they have a lot of great information for families too, for, you know, camp counselor information, like just it's broken down, but specific to children and teens. We have the Trevor Project. They do LGBTQ suicide prevention services. They've got resources, but as well as like social, kind of more of a social media sort of space for LGBTQ young adults. The Trans Law Center, which is a trans-led civil rights legal organization based in the Bay Area in California, but they have a lot of good resources on their site as well. And again, you have now the link to the Family Acceptance Project, which I really encourage folks to check out. And I believe Caitlin just put in the chat too, but Family Acceptance Project will be launching a new searchable website to connect LGBTQ young people and families with resources across the US. Wow, before the holidays, that's awesome. So that in itself is going to be a great addition to already a great resource. So keep an eye on that. So I do want to give time for Q&A. If you have questions, if there's things you feel like are still really confusing. I'm also, because it just says Q&A and you can do that, I'll leave this up for folks to take note of. So I'm more than happy to have this conversation with you offline from here, because I also know it is hard, to sometimes ask things, or you need to formulate the question or something comes up later. So you're more than welcome to email me. My email address and my personal website are up there. And we can, have a conversation that's maybe geared more specifically to what it is that you are looking to gain or learn from. But I would encourage folks, if they have any questions that they feel comfortable asking, to ask them. Because maybe someone else has the same question. I know that sounds so silly. I literally was a student in school that had questions and didn't ask. And now I ask people all the time, like when I'm working with students, to ask questions because it's okay and someone else might have them. So believe me when I say I understand that it is and can be intimidating. But really, if you have it, again, this is how we all learn together, is asking these questions, sometimes taking the risk. I know it's uncomfortable. That's how we grow. We're not going to grow if we stay always comfortable in that comfortable space, right? We have to push a little bit and it's going to be uncomfortable. Sure. So Chris is asking about gender fluidity. So I personally don't identify as someone who is gender fluid. And if folks do identify that way, I encourage folks to add maybe what that means for them in the chat. Because again, I'm going to use more of a, I guess, a general definition based on what it is that, I guess, a general definition based on someone else's, I guess, interpretation of that, right? So, so you have, let's, I guess, take a step backwards, right? So we talked about gender binary, and we talked about how it's I don't want to say a debunked myth, but it's been disproven as you have to identify it as male or female. We also talked about a gender spectrum, right? And so that folks can exist anywhere and or beyond that spectrum. So my understanding, and again, I do apologize if this doesn't apply to all folks, but it is someone who may be more gender fluid, or we're talking about gender fluidity, is somebody who really does not adhere to one particular sense of gender identity, right? I will use myself as an example, but I don't identify as somebody who is gender fluid. But today I'm feeling very, very male. I'm identifying as a man. Maybe next week, I'm not really feeling that anymore. And my gender identity sort of is going to change based on, right, how I'm feeling internally about my gender. So it's someone who is not fixed in one particular gender identity, and that may move throughout time, And there's a book, I want to say it's called Raising My Rainbow, which is pretty good about raising a sort of a gender fluid child, and that adds a layer to communicating about pronouns. and making sure, right, that the pronouns we're using are respectful for that person based on where they might be in that fluid process. I hope that helped, or I hope that answered, because I feel like Chris is asking to be kind to me and ask a question. But that is sort of my understanding, right? Let's see here. I see another question. Try to go in order before the chat gets too long here. So it is a personal question that I don't have to answer. So, okay, so the question is, if I identified as a non-binary person before becoming, well, I guess to rephrase it, but before coming out, right, and identifying as a trans person. So I did not identify as non-binary. When I was younger, I did not really have any understanding of the trans community. I really didn't know about gender identity. I didn't know I could have a gender identity that wasn't the one I was assigned at birth. And so I knew that I was attracted to women. And so I took that as my sort of leading cue to come out. And so I originally came out and identified as a lesbian. My sexual orientation, right, was sort of what I used to base that, not understanding my gender identity could be different. And then in terms of my expression, I've always been very masculine. My gender expression has always been this way. It probably hasn't changed, actually. And so I dress the same way I've been dressing since prior to transitioning. What's changed is my gender identity. But it's a good question. And honestly, and I do like that you phrased it by saying I don't have to answer. I think outside of this kind of a space where we're learning, right, and folks are offering up information, it's one of those things like you would never walk up to a person on the street and ask. But in this kind of a context, in this space where I've already offered you parts of my life, very different scenario. So I do appreciate the question. Let's see here, some general comments about issues directed, or I guess in relation to being Japanese or Japanese American. So let's see here. Awesome question. So the question is about, I guess, Japanese and Japanese American parents and the struggle related to gender and gender identity, and ways to help parents and families support trans and gender diverse family members. So, so for me, I mean, I'm pretty fortunate. I will say my parents are third generation, right, Japanese American. And so this is going to be very different, right, than folks whose parents immigrated here. I think that just in my own personal experience, finding other, right, Japanese American or Japanese folks, to have a conversation with is the most helpful. Because in my experience, it took me a long time before I met other even Asian American, right, Asian Pacific Islander folks who were part of the LGBTQ community. And so meeting folks who can share that cultural aspect, I think is going to be the most helpful in helping to understand gender and gender identity. I don't know too much about, like, in terms of finding translated material if your parents or people in your life don't speak English, or maybe read English, or are not as comfortable in that, is also obviously helpful. But I think when you can have that conversation with folks who at least can relate on that cultural level, finding a support group that can do that is super helpful. And then ways to help parents and families to support trans and gender diverse family members. If you have a PFLAG chapter in your area, I always encourage parents and families to attend that, because of the sort of some simplistic way that the chapters, we run our chapter meetings. It's based on experience. It's based on the things that folks have learned and tried and that worked for them, and they're sharing these experiences with other people. And so you're hearing it from another person directly, and not from some big organization or some ad that maybe isn't as personal as hearing it directly from another parent or family's family's experience or story. And yes, my mom did throw up into the chat here, but there are posters for family acceptance projects that are available in Japanese if that is something that folks need, right? If people in your life are not as comfortable or maybe not as confident in having the material in English, there is already a resource for you that's translated. And Christy, it's definitely a process of learning. And I think you being here is already a huge step in that process. So thank you for being here. Your child is very lucky to have you. All right, where am I at here in time? So we're hitting about the hour mark. I know these can run for up to an hour and a half. However, I wasn't planning to use that whole time if folks don't have more questions. So kind of a last call for questions. And again, my email is there, my website is there. I am more than happy to continue this conversation. Or if you're looking for very specific resources and you're not sure where to turn for that, I'm more than happy to help you sort of navigate that. Sure, no problem. And thank you, you're so kind. I could have gone through the glossary and I was like, oh man, there's just a lot, a lot of terminology, but I will totally touch on these. So Chris is asking about gender dysphoria and euphoria, right? And euphoria. So gender dysphoria is, for me, and again, I encourage folks to look. I've been using the PFLAG glossary, but there's many good glossaries. Just look for one that is provided by a LGBTQ group or nonprofit, because you can find not accurate definitions if you just search the whole wide internet. But gender dysphoria basically is like the distress or discomfort that is caused by sort of that misalignment, by the person, my sex assigned at birth, and my gender identity not matching. And so for me, it was things like looking in the mirror, right, and seeing a body that did not reflect the one that I see when I close my eyes, right? Having a voice that didn't sound that way for me was the same thing. And so it can be different for different folks. Different things will cause, right, that kind of distress or that discomfort for folks. I don't know another way to describe it, but that's basically it, right? Like the discomfort and that comes from a person's assigned sex at birth and their gender identity not being in alignment. And then gender euphoria, sort of the opposite of that, but the feeling that someone gets from being addressed in the right, using the right pronouns, having whether that means for them having their name changed, being on hormones, having some kind of surgery, the feeling that comes from after that for being right now in alignment with how they identify their gender and their gender identity. So I think I like to think of it as like, for me, it was very helpful to focus on that over focusing on the dysphoria that I felt. But these are just things that trans and gender non-binary folks may experience, and it may come in waves and come and go. And I know for me, it was never like a one and done thing, that there were days I felt really amazing, and there were days I looked in the mirror and something about the way my hips looked set me into a really weird headspace, right? And really, it felt really uncomfortable. And it can change over time, but hopefully that helps and doesn't add to folks already. I know a lot of words, a lot of terms, and I will upload my slides for folks to be able to access if you would like to reference them. You know what? I don't. I'd have to do some research on that. I know that there are some going on, Christy, in terms of young virtual support groups for young folks. I would encourage you to email me and I can help you maybe find something more specific, just because young people is kind of a wide, could be a wide range, but we can see what there is and I can try to help you find some that are, like well run and through respectable places and organizations that are that have a really good record for providing that kind of space. Yes, perfect. Yeah, I would have to do some research. That's why I don't know some off the top of my head. I know some folks have moved back into meeting in person, so then it depends on where you're located and seeing what we can find for you locally. So yes, please email me. I would love to help you provide you some at least leads and places you can reach out to. All right. If there are no other burning questions for folks, okay, in Washington. Awesome. I love the Pacific Northwest, so I will definitely try to help you. And I know some folks up in that area, so they might have an idea of things available up there. Anyways, I am to read you all a little thing at the end of this, so I do appreciate you all, hanging in there, chatting with me, going through this process. And really like stepping out of your comfort zones. I would imagine for folks that this might have been that first time we had this conversation or you're hearing some of these things. And I 100% acknowledge that could be uncomfortable. And so I'm definitely appreciative of you being here in this space with me and sort of sticking through that discomfort. Caitlin did just throw something up in here, and I think it's a link to the posters in Japanese. So if you're looking at that or you're looking for those, please bookmark that. I'm going to move on here and read you this little sort of closing thing for what's coming up next in the conference. But again, please reach out via email. And if you have other further questions or things, I might be able to help support you with. On that note, let me scroll over here. I copy and pasted what I needed to tell you all. So again, of course, I hope you enjoyed your session here with me, but Okaidi hopes you enjoyed your session as well. There will be a workshop at 5:30 Pacific Standard Time for Japanese speaking individuals and allies. And then Okaidi Performs will begin at 6 p.m. and will feature queer and trans artists and performances. And I and Okaidi thank you for attending the Okaidi 2021 conference. Again, please reach out to me if you have any other questions or things that come up for you. And otherwise, I'm done here. So please enjoy the rest of the conference. And Okaidi will see you at 6 o'clock for Okaidi Performs. Cool. Oh, thank you. Christy, you're too nice. Thank you. Goodbye, Mother.
Unmute.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
All right, that's it.
Papa and I were here. Thank you, honey, for doing that.
Uh-huh.
It was great.
Yeah, it was really great. Papa's really proud of you.
Cool. Well, I got the hookup here with good internet, so.
Good. Oh, where did you go?
I'm at Stephanie and Mari's.
Oh, that's so great. Tell them thank you so much.
I will. All right.
Okay.
I will see you.
Okay.
Bye.
Good dog.
Is the dog good? Other people are still in here, but I'm just gonna ask.
Oh yeah. He's doing really well.
He says, come pick me up.
Okay. Thank you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye,
All
honey.
right. I'll see you all.
Okay, bye. There is a support group, I think.
Okay. Very good.